Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today into something pretty incredible, and that's your adrenal glands. We got a really interesting mix of stuff for this one. Textbook chapters, medical illustrations. It looks like someone out there is ready to get like a PhD level understanding of how these things work.
Yeah, they're really fascinating little organs.
They are. I always think about them when I think about like stress. It's like the alarm bells going off in your body. But they're so much more complex than that, right?
Oh,
So
absolute.
where do we even begin?
Well, maybe we should start by just thinking about them as like these tiny little command centers that sit right on top of your kidneys. They're constantly monitoring and adjusting to keep your whole system running smoothly.
So like little mini superheroes working behind the scenes.
Exactly. And what's even cooler is each adrenal gland is actually two glands in one. You have the cortex and the medulla.
Ah, that's right, the buy one, get one free deal from the body.
Exactly. And just like in a company, they each have their own sort of specialty. The adrenal cortex is like the long-term strategist. It's dealing with ongoing challenges and keeping things stable day in, day out.
All right, so the cortex, that's a good place to start. Now, I remember from the textbook excerpts that it's divided into zones, kind of like layers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, imagine the cortex is like a three-layer cake. Each layer has its own unique flavor. So the outermost layer is called the zona glomerulosa, and it's all about mineralocorticoids, specifically a hormone called aldosterone.
Aldosterone. Okay, so what is it and what's its role?
Well, you can think of aldosterone as the body's salt watchdog.
Salt watchdog. Interesting. So why is salt so important in all of this?
Well, aldosterone basically ensures that your body is holding on to just the right amount of sodium. And where sodium goes, water follows. So this is super important for regulating your blood pressure.
So it's like a natural thermostat for your blood pressure,
Yeah, exactly.
making sure everything stays within a healthy range.
Exactly. Yep.
So problems like high blood pressure could come in when that system gets thrown off.
Exactly. And on the other side, if you aren't producing enough aldosterone, you can experience low blood pressure and you can have fatigue. It's all about balance.
It's fattening. So, okay, what about the middle layer of the cake?
That's the soda fasciculata, and that layer's main player is cortisol, which is the hormone most people associate with stress.
Oh yeah, cortisol. Everyone knows that one.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does so much more than just like fuel that fight or flight response, right?
It does, yeah.
So what else does cortisol do?
Well, it plays a crucial role in energy management. It regulates your blood sugar. It even has an impact on your immune system.
So it's a lot more complex than just a simple stress hormone then.
It really is. Think of it this way. Cortisol helps your body access its stored energy when it needs it most. Like, let's say you're under stress, you're sick, or even just waking up in the morning. That's cortisol.
Like a built-in energy reserve.
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes me think about those medical illustrations that we got. The ones showing the effects of too much cortisol, like in Cushing's syndrome. I remember those round faces, and the changes in body fat distribution were pretty striking.
Yeah, that's a classic example of what can happen when you have a cortisol imbalance. It can be due to a tumor or maybe long-term use of certain medication. But yeah, too much cortisol can have a lot of really noticeable effects.
Wow, it's amazing to think how much these tiny little glands can really influence our overall health. Okay, onto the innermost layer of this adrenal cortex.
All right.
What's going on in there?
So this layer is called the zona reticularis, and it's where things get a little bit surprising. This is where small amounts of sex hormones are produced, primarily androgens.
Wait, sex hormones. I thought that was mainly the ovaries and testes.
They are, but the adrenal glands also contribute a small amount. So while it's not their primary role, these adrenal androgens do play a supporting role in things like libido and body hair development.
Huh. So even our sex hormones are tied into this whole network controlled by the adrenal glands. It really is like everything's connected. I have to ask, how does the body actually know when to release these hormones? It seems like it's got to be pretty carefully regulated, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There are these incredibly sophisticated feedback loops in place that are constantly monitoring and adjusting your hormone levels. You can think of it like a thermostat for your hormones, just making sure everything stays balanced.
Okay, so like a thermostat, can you give us an example of how one of these feedback loops works? Maybe using aldosterone, since we just talked about that.
Yeah, sure. So let's imagine you're out for a run on a hot day and you get dehydrated. So your blood volume drops and your blood pressure starts to dip a little bit. Well, your body senses this, and it activates something called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system.
Renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, that's a mouthful.
It is.
What happens next?
So this system basically works like a chain reaction. It starts with the release of an enzyme called mannan from your kidneys, and then renin triggers this whole cascade of events that ultimately leads to the production of something called angiotensin 2, which is a powerful signal that tells your adrenal cortex, hey, we need more aldosterone.
Ah, okay, and then aldosterone tells the kidneys to hold on to more sodium, which pulls in more water, and that boosts your blood volume and brings that blood pressure right back up. That's pretty clever.
Yeah, it's a really elegant system. It's incredibly efficient at maintaining that balance.
It is. It makes you realize just how much is going on beneath the surface all the time to keep us in a state of equilibrium. So we've covered the adrenal cortex. We've talked about this impressive array of hormones. What about the other part of the gland, the adrenal medulla? What's its role in this whole symphony?
Yeah, that's where we shift gears. We move from the long game to that more immediate response. So the adrenal medulla is all about that quick burst of energy that you need when you have to react quickly. Like, think about those times when you've had to slam on your brakes to avoid an accident, or when you've suddenly been asked to give a presentation and you weren't prepared.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling. My heart starts racing. My palms get sweaty. It's like my whole body goes into overdrive.
Exactly. That's your adrenal medulla springing into action. And we'll dive into all of that right after this.
Okay, so right before the break, we were talking about those times when we feel that surge of energy, like when we're suddenly put on the spot or have to react super quickly. What's happening inside us at that moment?
That's when the adrenal medulla steps in. It's kind of like the body's special forces unit, ready to mobilize at a moment's
I would
notice.
love that analogy. So if the cortex is like handling the day-to-day operations, then the medulla is our emergency response team.
Exactly. And instead of those hormones like cortisol that we were just talking about, the adrenal medulla pumps out what are called catecholamines, mainly adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, and noradrenaline or norepinephrine.
Adrenaline, I mean, that's the stuff that makes action movies so thrilling, right? It's like a superpower. But what are those catecholamine actually doing in our bodies?
They're the key players in what we call that classic fight or flight response. So think about that feeling when you narrowly avoid an accident or you have to speak in front of a large audience. Your heart races, you breathe faster, your senses sharpen. That's adrenaline and noradrenaline at work.
So it's like our body is instantly shifting into a higher gear, getting us ready to either confront the challenge or just run away as fast as possible.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical threats either. Let's say you have a big presentation at work. Even though it's not actually life or death, your body still perceives it as a challenge. And so that adrenal medulla kicks in to give you that extra boost of energy and focus.
It's fascinating how our bodies respond to these perceived threats, even when they're not actually dangerous. It really makes me think about how important it is to manage stress, since those same responses are happening even when we're just dealing with everyday pressures.
That's such an important point because if we're constantly triggering that fight or flight response, it can start to have some negative effects on our health over time. But in the right context, it's an incredibly beneficial system, helping us rise to challenges and adapt to new situations.
Okay, so we've got the adrenal cortex handling the long game, and the adrenal medulla is ready to jump into action when needed. But what happens when one of these systems gets out of whack? Like, what if something goes wrong?
Well, if the adrenal cortex isn't functioning the way it should, it can lead to a whole range of problems, from just fatigue and low blood pressure to more serious conditions like Addison's disease.
Right, and we talked about the effects of too much cortisol earlier, like in Cushing's syndrome. But what about the adrenal medulla? What happens if it becomes overactive?
Well, imagine that fight or flight response being triggered constantly, even when there's no real threat present. That's essentially what can happen with an overactive adrenal medulla.
That sounds exhausting. What could cause that kind of overactivity?
One possibility is a tumor in the adrenal medulla called a pheochromocytoma, and it can lead to this surge of adrenaline and noradrenaline, basically making someone feel constantly on edge.
So they're experiencing those racing heartbeats and the sweating, that heightened anxiety, even when they're just trying to relax.
Exactly. It's like their internal alarm system is stuck in the on position.
It really makes you appreciate that delicate balance that these glands are maintaining. They're like these tiny conductors orchestrating this intricate symphony of hormones that keep our bodies running smoothly.
That's a great way to put it. And what's even more remarkable is how the system interacts with our brains and our emotions. We can't really talk about the adrenal glands without talking about stress.
You're right, stress is what really triggers these glands to go into action. But what exactly do we even mean when we say stress? It seems like such a broad term.
It is. It is a really broad term. And it's important to remember that stress isn't always a bad thing. In fact, a certain amount of stress is actually good for us. It helps keep us alert and focused and motivated. It's what drives us to achieve our goals and overcome challenges.
So it's like a healthy amount of stress is what keeps us engaged in life.
Exactly. The problem is when stress becomes chronic or overwhelming, that's when it can start to have a negative impact on our physical and mental health.
So how does our body actually respond to stress? I know the adrenal glands are involved, but what's the bigger picture here?
Well, our bodies have this remarkable system called the stress response. It's also known as the general adaptation syndrome. And it's this three-stage process that basically describes how we react to any kind of stressor, whether it's physical, emotional, or even environmental.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk us through those three stages. What happens first?
The first stage is called the alarm reaction, and this is that immediate fight or flight response that we were talking about earlier, where the adrenal medulla really takes center stage. It's your body's initial reaction to a threat or a challenge, that surge of adrenaline, getting you ready to act fast.
So our body's saying, hold on, something's happening here. We need to figure this out quickly.
Exactly. Your heart rate and breathing speed up, your muscles tense, your senses sharpen. It's all about mobilizing your body's resources to deal with the situation.
And this is happening whether the stressor is a physical threat, like someone breaking into your house, or something more emotional, like a looming deadline at work.
That's right. Your body doesn't necessarily distinguish between the different types of stressors. It just recognizes that something demanding its attention and needs to be addressed.
So what happens if the stressor doesn't go away immediately? Does our body just stay in this heightened state of alert indefinitely?
No, that's where the second stage comes in, which is called the resistance reaction. And this is all about adapting to the stressor and trying to restore balance.
So it's like our body is shifting gears from emergency mode to, okay, let's figure out how to handle this for the long haul.
Exactly. And this is where the adrenal cortex steps back into the spotlight, specifically with the release of cortisol. So cortisol plays this really crucial role in helping your body adapt to that ongoing stress. It helps mobilize energy stores, regulates your blood sugar levels, and it even impacts your immune system.
Wait, what does cortisol do to our immune system?
Well, when you're under chronic stress, your body have to prioritize. So it diverts energy away from functions that it deems less essential in that moment, like immune defense, and it focuses that energy towards fueling the more immediate needs of that stress response. It's like putting your immune system on hold while you deal with this more pressing issue.
That makes sense from like an evolutionary perspective. If you're running from a predator, you don't need to worry about fighting off a cold. But it does sound like it could be a problem if that stress becomes chronic.
You're absolutely right. Prolonged exposure to stress can weaken your immune system, and it can make you more susceptible to infections and other illnesses. It can also lead to a whole host of other health problems down the line.
Okay, this is really starting to paint a much clearer picture of how stress can impact our health. So what's the third stage of the stress response then?
If the stress continues for a prolonged period, your body eventually enters the third stage, which is exhaustion. And this is where your body's resources start to become depleted, and you really start to experience the negative effects of that chronic stress.
So it's like our body is waving a white flag saying, I can't keep this up any longer.
Yeah, in a way, yes. The exhaustion stage is marked by fatigue, burnout, weakened immunity. You have an increased risk of developing various health problems, including cardiovascular disease, depression, anxiety. The list goes on and on.
That's a lot to take in, but it's incredibly insightful. It really highlights the importance of managing stress effectively.
Absolutely. Chronic stress can take a really serious toll on our bodies and our minds. And just understanding how that stress response works can empower us to start taking steps to protect our health and well-being.
So bringing it all back to the adrenal glands, what role do they play in all of this?
Well, they're essentially the key players in orchestrating this whole stress response. They produce the hormones that fuel our reactions to stress, both in the short term and in the long term.
So if we want to manage stress effectively, we need to understand and support our adrenal glands.
That's right. And taking care of our overall health through things like a balanced diet, regular exercise, and getting enough sleep can go a long way in supporting those adrenal glands and helping them function optimally.
This has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive. I mean, we've explored the anatomy of the adrenal glands, we've delved into this intricate world of hormones, and we've uncovered this complex interplay of the stress response.
It's amazing how much power these tiny little glands hold, isn't it? They're really essential for our survival and well-being.
I think our listener is walking away with a much deeper appreciation for these incredible organs, and perhaps even a little motivation to prioritize stress management.
I hope so.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration into the world of science and the human body. You know, it's really incredible to think about how something as abstract as stress can have such a profound impact on our physical health.
Yeah, it really is, and it all comes back to those tiny but mighty adrenal glands. They're at the heart of how our bodies respond to any kind of demand, whether it's a physical threat or a deadline at work, even just the daily hustle and bustle of life.
So we talked about the three stages of the stress response: the alarm, the resistance, and the exhaustion. But I'm curious, is there any way to know when we're shifting from like a healthy level of stress into that chronic, harmful level?
That's a great question. And it's important to remember that everyone experiences stress a little bit differently, right? What might be overwhelming for one person could be totally invigorating for someone else.
So there's no, like, one-size-fits-all answer?
Not exactly, but there are some general signs and symptoms that you can look out for, like persistent fatigue, even after you've had what you think is a good night's sleep. That can be a red flag. Changes in appetite, digestive issues, difficulty concentrating, increased irritability, those are all pretty common signs that stress might be taking a toll.
I mean, those are all things that a lot of us experience from time to time. So how can we tell if it's just like normal life stress versus something more serious?
Yeah, I mean, the key is to really pay attention to your body's signals. If you're consistently feeling overwhelmed, drained, and just unable to cope, it's a good idea to check in with your doctor or mental health professional. They can help you assess your stress levels and develop some strategies for managing it effectively.
That makes sense. So we know chronic stress is bad for us, but what's actually happening in our bodies when we're constantly stressed out?
Well, remember those feedback loops that we talked about earlier? When stress becomes chronic, those systems can get thrown out of whack. Cortisol, for example, is designed to be released in those short bursts. But if it's constantly elevated, it can start to cause problems.
Like what kinds of problems?
Well, chronically high levels of cortisol have been linked to weight gain, particularly around the abdomen, increased blood pressure, even impaired cognitive function. It can also suppress the immune system, making you more vulnerable to infection and other illnesses.
Wow, it's amazing how much these hormones can influence our overall health. It really highlights the importance of managing stress effectively.
It really does, and there are a lot of different strategies that can help. Exercise is a fantastic stress reliever. It helps burn off excess energy, releases endorphins, improves mood.
Yeah, I know for me personally, even just going for a short walk can make a huge difference in how I'm feeling.
Absolutely, and finding healthy ways to relax and unwind is crucial too. Things like meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, these can all help calm your nervous system and reduce those stress hormones.
So it's not just about avoiding stress altogether, it's about learning how to manage it effectively and give our bodies a chance to recover.
Exactly, and don't underestimate the power of sleep. When we're sleep deprived, our bodies actually produce more cortisol, which makes us even more susceptible to the negative effects of stress.
It all ties together, doesn't it? Diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, they all play a role in keeping our adrenal glands functioning properly and our bodies in balance.
It really does, and the more we understand about these intricate systems, the better equipped we are to take care of our health and well-being.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive into the world of the adrenal glands. We've explored their anatomy, we talked about their crucial role in the stress response, and the importance of maintaining a healthy balance in our lives.
It's been a pleasure discussing this with you. These tiny glands really are remarkable, aren't they?
They really are. I think our listener is walking away with a much deeper appreciation for these hidden heroes inside all of us. And hopefully a little bit more motivation to help prioritize self-care and stress management. After all, as we've learned, taking care of our adrenal glands is essential for taking care of ourselves. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration into the world of science in the human body. 7C